Hello, BookTube. Well, it's that time again. Those of you who've been watching the odometer now know that this channel passed 12.2K subscribers. Anytime there's a couple of zeros next to each other, you people like to ask questions. So I put out a call for questions, and I got a bunch of them. I ported them over to a Google Doc, so I may have omitted some by mistake, but while I was porting them over and cleaning them up, I was glancing at them, and they're great, as always. That's the reason I keep doing these things. If the Q&As were just, what's your favorite color over and over again, I probably wouldn't, as egomaniacal as I am. But instead, the questions are really, really good. So we're going to go through these, and we're going to do it in the same way that we always do. I will cut the videos off at around 30 minutes and just do as many as we can. As many videos as it takes, not as many questions. I'll be reading every question, for good or ill. So we start off with Tommy Umbrella. Hello, Steve. A big heartfelt thank you for all the wonderful book recommendations you gave us over the years. Well, thank you as well. That goes without saying, I hope, in these Q&As. I'm getting a lot more than I'm giving. Here's my question. I've read both The Elements of Style and On Writing Well, and I like them both. Could you recommend another good book about writing? I could. I could recommend a whole bunch of good books about writing. Usually, the reason I'm squinting, the reason I'm giving you a patented Steve Donoghue squint, is because usually it's been my experience that when people ask for recommendations on good books about writing, it's because they're not writing. The best possible book on writing is the pile of first drafts that you've written yourself. That is the most instructive thing. When you ask, do I have another good book on writing, I immediately want to say, well, maybe I do and maybe I don't, but have you written today? Have you generated 5,000 words today? So a question right back at you. John Stanley says, your channel continues to be a joy. Doesn't really. The Frida part, probably. You often recommend reading without sub-vocalizing. Only if you want to increase your reading speed. You can sub-vocalize your heart's content. I only recommend it in context of people complaining that they don't read fast enough. If you are happy with that, then don't bother. I find with some writers, Dickens, Trollope, I happily read in that way at speed, but with others, say Conrad or Dostoevsky, if I read in that way, I don't retain what I've read so clearly, so I'm more methodical with them. Does that chime at all with your experience, or do you read everything the same way? First of all, I want to take issue with the smuggled-in inference there, the implication that that when you read without sub-vocalizing, it's less methodical. But again, it's totally a question of your own enjoyment of your reading. I don't sub-vocalize, anybody, ever. But if you find that self-vocalizing helps you to enjoy or retain more of a certain author than a certain other, then fine, swap in between. I find it hard to believe that it would be comfortable at all to swap from doing it to not doing it. But if it works for you, then it works for you. I like Everyman classics almost as much as Penguins. I find the newer Everymans delightful to read, but the books are huge and not pocket-friendly. And I have a very soft spot for the older Everymans, even if the text was very small. Yeah, those older Everymans are really well put together, and they are the perfect size. Just the perfect size, until your eyes start to rebel. What do you think of Everyman, and do you prefer the new or the old? Well, the old ones are more adventurous. They're less of just a straight-up academic canonical reprint service. But you're right, they're books. They're normal-sized books. They are a nice quality. They don't have quite the same trim as other books do, so they feel different in the hand. But they're not as convenient as those old Everymans. I grab some of those when I can. Just if it's a little book that I really like. The problem with the older Everymans in that little size is that their smallness often means that even with a comparatively small canonical classic, it's broken up into parts. So you won't get all of anything in your pocket. Lastly, what do you think of Hammer horror movies from the 50s and 60s? I don't think as much about them as their fans do. That's for sure. I like them fine, but I don't. I know the fandom of the Hammer horror films, and it's like nothing that I can describe. Certainly nothing that I experienced when I watched them. Let's see here. Olive McQueen says, Steve, thank you so much for keeping me both entertained and informed with your daily videos. I assure you, the pleasure is all mine. I have one question and one request. The question is what your views are on the works of John Banville. Well, I like him. I always get the impression I'm supposed to like him more, but I think he is resolutely a C-list author. I've never read anything from him. That thing that I always describe when your short hairs stand up when you're reading, when time goes away, when self goes away, and suddenly you're just completely mowed down by a book. I don't think he's capable of that. I've never even come close to that with him. I never read a book of his when I don't hear him hammering the boards together. I know that he has bigger fans than that, but it's never really worked for me. I like him. That's not to say I dislike, but and the request is a very selfish one. I absolutely love your old Booker long list and short list videos. Would you please do them for this year's prize? I read the long list last year and am planning on doing so again this year, but I would absolutely love to hear your views on the books. Please, please, please. I don't see what the point would be. I really don't. These aren't about books anymore. They aren't about literary merit anymore at all. And they aren't, in my opinion, ever going to be about those things again. In this field, as in a lot of other fields, Twitter has won. Look at the long list that just came out, I think, last week for the PEN/Faulkner Award. Just Google the PEN/Faulkner Long List 2022 and look at that list. That list is the future of every award that is allegedly merit-based, not just literary, but any kind, Oscars, whatever. That list is the future of every allegedly merit-based award. Now, if you look at that long list and you don't see anything wrong with it, then any of my criticisms of that list will just leave you with no avenue other than to call me a bigot of some kind, to personally insult me. You will have to go to personal insult. You can't defend anything that you want. You can't defend that list in any way if I don't like it other than to just insult me, and I don't want you to insult me. And if you look at that list and you do see something wrong with it, well, then what would be the point of me echoing what is to both of us as obvious as the nose on your face? It doesn't seem worthwhile for me to do a video like that either way. I wouldn't be talking about books. I would be talking about other things that the 2022 long list for the PEN/Faulkner makes screamingly obvious. They make it more obvious with that list than any previous literary long list has ever made it. But that only because they're trailblazers, only because they were first. All of all literary awards, if we want to just concentrate on books here, will be that PEN/Faulkner list. So, and what would be the point of me talking about such a thing? I would be inviting either consensus or personal insult in my own comments field. I'd rather that we just avoid it. I'm very sorry to say that. I wish that it weren't a completely fallow subject. But it is. Just look at that long list. If you don't see what's wrong with that long list, then you're going to be very happy with literary awards from here on out. And I guess I'm happy for you for that fact. That wasn't too convoluted. Doom Antidote says, if you were to write your very own myth retelling novel, which character/story would you write about? Well, it's not hypothetical. I actually did that. I wrote a novel of the Trojan War called Troy War. And it was a weird experience. It is a weird, violent, incredibly savage book. And it doesn't read like anything else that I wrote. The people who read it said this doesn't read like anything else that I've ever read from you, fiction or nonfiction. And I loved the experience so much that I wondered if I could recapture it, and I did. I wrote 2 sequels. I wrote a trilogy. So I wrote Troy War. Then I wrote a novelization of the whole story of Ulysses, of Odysseus, that I called Steve Donoghue's Ulysses. Not just Ulysses, but Steve Donoghue's Ulysses. And then I wrote the Telemachiad, and the concluding volume in that trilogy, if you want to call it that, about Ulysses' haughty son and his adventures. And that was a blast. I understand the appeal these things have, both to their readers and to the growing number of authors who write myth retellings. Although I don't think they write them like I did. Not Troy War, anyway. Leo Percara says, hello, Steve. My cousin misgendered a teacher in one of his college classes. Here in Argentina, these people are not as prone to outrage as in your country. At least I think so. But would you apologize personally, and how would you do it? Well, I know you're not trying to trap me, but there's no point here in discussing what I myself personally would do in this situation. Rather, it's a question of your cousin misgendered a teacher in one of his college classes. The only question here should be, what is the college's policy? they'll have one, and it will be elaborated in great detail, and your cousin should follow that policy to the letter. If that policy mandates an apology, if that policy mandates a public apology in front of the whole classroom, if that policy mandates a written apology, chances are not only will the action be mandated in the school's policy, but maybe some of the wording as well. Do it. If your school mandates that, do it. Just do whatever it is that they say you have to do to make it right. Can you recommend us a book on a topic like this? A miscommunication that goes off the rails. Again, you're not trying to trap me. We're all friends here. My contention would be there was no miscommunication, but I don't recommend a book because the rules change too fast to be codified in any book. Again, I would stick solely with what the people in charge, who are not necessarily the people in authority, find out what the people in charge want your cousin to do to avoid being destroyed, to avoid being called horrible, savage names in public, to avoid having those names be SEO bombed so that when a future employer looks up your cousin's name, those words come up, to avoid having their children stalked, to avoid having their apartment burned. You find out what the people with power want and do it. Your cousin has made one of the worst missteps that you can do in the world. So you slap a kid, it's nothing compared to misgendering them. So find out what the rules are and obey them. Dr. Bacon says 13 looms. Oh, no, it doesn't. Please. We're off to a rocky start right here. You people make trouble with your questions. My questions. Could you offer some advice on how better to retain what I read? How are you able to read so quickly and also recall the details of the book? I find that the easiest way for me to do so is to take separate notes while reading, but the trade-off is that it severely hampers my reading speed. Well, yes. In my case, it does not. As the kids say online, your mileage may vary. So if you find that the way that you retain the most, and that is pleasing to you, is to really slow down and take notes, then do that and just sacrifice reading speed. Reading speed isn't the point, right? The point is how much are you enjoying what you read. If that's what you want, then really engage with it. Get out a notebook, look things up, write things down, write excerpts, write your thoughts, a reading journal, all that sort of thing. If that helps, if that's what does it for you, then do that. Absolutely. Reading speed is totally immaterial. It's a question of how much you enjoy. Hamilton Thompson says, the other day I happened to pass a gentleman walking his doggie on their morning walk. They were both dressed for a brisk February, a cute sweater on his canine. Is Frida also a winter fashionista when her daddy and go on strolls? Frida doesn't wear clothes. No. Candace Uri says, happy weekend Q&A. In his essays, Michel de Montaigne cites Ovid's Metamorphoses as the work that sparked his love of books. Was there a book or author that contributed to making you the avid reader you are now? Yes. Yes, the book was the Metamorphoses, and the author was Ovid. Make of that what you will. Link Joker says, congrats, Steve, you're almost to that diamond play button. I can practically see it hanging on your wall already. If there is ever a diamond play button on that wall, if I have to replace that owl picture that I got at a church charity sale with a diamond play button, I will take a page from my oldest playbook on this channel and get every single one of you a book. It's never going to happen. Number one, what are your thoughts on historical fiction of Sharon K. Penman? I like it. I've reviewed some of it. I was very happy to get back in the reviewing game in time to review a book of hers for an American publication. I like it. It doesn't ever thrill me. It's too careful and too well researched to thrill me. I can pick almost any book of hers and think of another novel that thrills me more on the same period, on the same subject matter. I guess you just have to. There's something to be said for a nice, inviting, warm bath of a big historical novel. Number two, thoughts on Toynbee's A Study of History. It's a little bit philosophical, which I mean, of course, as a pure insult. It's a little bit wordy and navel-gazing and self-referential and self-aggrandizing. There are some insights in there, but there are better studies of history, I think, to read. And even then, even then, you're not on the strongest ground possible reading studies of history if you haven't read history. If you've read 10 works of history, you're suddenly reading studies of history. Philosophy just in general, it bugs me. And studies of history tend to be, this is my philosophy of history. This is how history works. And number 3, finally, thoughts on Moorcock's Piat Quartet. I read it once, and I didn't enjoy it at all. But now I'm a little suspect of that, because I read Jerusalem once, and I didn't enjoy it at all. And then I went back and thought, I don't think I'm missing anything with those books, though. They struck me as just wheel spinning. Mr. Morningstar says, congrats. Being new to your channel, I'd like to ask what horror novels you love. I don't get along with horror novels. They just don't do anything for me at all. And as a result, I'm not assiduous about seeking them out. I know you enjoy well-written books on every genre, any as old as Rosemary's Baby or as new as Tinfoil Butterfly. Well, I do. I'm not dismissing the horror genre. It's just never done anything for me. It's a blank spot in my reading, or comparatively blank. I read a handful of new horror novels every year. I'm not sure that I would even classify Rosemary's Baby as a horror novel. I tend to add a far more pronounced supernatural element before I'll think of something as a horror novel. Even so, they just don't tend to do it for me. They just don't. I'll have to work on that, especially since I broke an over 10-year hiatus on actual published fiction under my own name by appearing in a horror anthology. It's Served Cold is a horror tube anthology that is at Amazon now that has a short story of mine. It's the first short story of mine under my own name to appear in a long time. So if I'm going to do that, I might as well read more of it. But it's so much horror that I've read strikes me that it has the overt intention of scaring me, and that is never going to happen with a work of literature. That is never going to happen any more than with a work of cinema. So since I know that we're on completely different wavelengths, I just tend not to do it, and that's wrong on my part, because I'm missing what the author is doing. I'm missing good writing in some cases, so I need to fix that. But I don't have anything for you in the meantime. Maybury Book Club. Hello, Steve. Who's your favorite buddy reader? I can tell you who my least favorite buddy reader is. That's for sure. I've been interested in Spanish literature in translation from Spain, and have found it surprisingly difficult to crack. Do you have any thoughts on why Spanish literature in translation might be less available than French, Russian, Italian literature? And could you please offer any recommendations? Recommendations would take some time to work up. I don't really know. I think I have noticed this disparity that you're talking about, but I don't really have an explanation for it. The first explanation off the top of my head is just global North narcissism, but that wouldn't really count for Spanish literature. I don't know. I don't know what the reason is. There's certainly it's a scandal. A publishing house that will be patrolling the docks for something new in Italian to translate won't have even thought about translating major works in Spanish literature, only a handful of which I think have even had one English language translation. So I don't really have an answer. I have noticed it. Big Z Moke says, hi, Steve. In many of your videos, you've talked about the importance of having a good translation which conveys the nuances and spirits of a non-English original. Well, okay, yes, that is important, but far more important is that you get along with your translation, regardless of what it is. Worlds are still being lost, no matter what, even the best translation. So the point is that you get along with the translator. You're going to be spending a lot of time in the same bed with them. Which languages can you yourself read with or without the help of a dictionary? And does this transfer to speaking ability? New here and love your videos. Greetings from the west coast of Ireland. Oh my God, the west coast of Ireland, where I used to live, and where Jason Harrigan currently abides. As to languages that I myself can read, I tend to get in trouble for this. I tend to make what 50 years ago would have been a fairly standard claim, and have people coming out of the woodwork saying, you know, I'm going to send you a 10-page notarized test, and you need to take it, or you need to recant that you ever said that you know how to read Italian, that you know how to read German. So now I don't quite know how to answer this. My usual answer is the standard Romance languages plus Greek and Latin. I'm pretty good with languages. I have the standard ones. Nothing outre, no Mandarin, no nothing like that. But when it transfers to speaking ability, the knowing of the languages doesn't. The speaking ability comes, for me, separate when I am around speakers. then all of a sudden it just comes rushing back to me, and I don't need to think about it at all. But those days are gone. I think those days are gone. I doubt that I will ever that I will ever travel again. So the days when I will feel those gates open and the language come rushing right back to my fingertips in the marketplace or in the bookstore, I think those days are over. That's kind of melancholy. Uh, Benjamin T says, "Hi, Steve. I am new to the channel." Well, all these people are new to the channel. How wonderful. And discovered you through our mutual love of hoarding Penguin classics. But I don't have that love anymore. I did with my huge Penguin Classic wall. And then when I was done doing the Daily Penguin for a whole year, I looked at that wall. I actually looked at it with clear eyes and saw 3, sometimes 4 copies of the same book. I saw whole shelves of Penguin Classics of books or authors that I don't care about at all, that I don't care to have them in my permanent collection in any format. Once I was done and took a clear look at my Penguin Classic wall, I realized that I had been hoarding them. And that the actual penguins that I want, the books that I go back to, were a small fraction of the whole penguin collection that I had. So I don't do it anymore. My question is a two-parter. I know nothing about poetry, but it is something I want to read more of. Where should I start, and will you be making a starter kit in the future? Also, what essay collections would you recommend? Well, you don't. Okay, the only thing you need to know about poetry, if you don't know anything about poetry, you want to learn more about it, you want to add it to your reading repertoire. You don't need to know anything about poetry other than what you like. That is the fine and only place to start. So find a nice big anthology. The Norton Anthology of Poetry is really good. The Oxford Book of English Verse is really good. Find a nice big collection of poetry and read through it. Make sure to breathe in between the poems. Make sure to think about the poems. Maybe even read them out loud. Find out what actually moves you, what you actually like. That will be different for every reader, and that's where you want to pursue. Once you figure out what you like in an anthology, get another anthology, read through that, see if there's any overlap. And then once you have a kind of a depth charge sense of what kinds of poetry you like, then if you want, you can study what those kinds are and figure out why you like them. That is a fascinating course on its own. But I want to point out, again, even once you know that, even once you have that chart, you still don't have to study any of this stuff. You can just read it to enjoy it. But that'd be the way to go. Go with anthology and find out what you like. You don't need to know what an anapest is. You don't need to study the mechanics of poetry at all. That we get way too many poetry pretentosauruses that way. Way too many people who use it as a cudgel against people rather than as a thing they like. Way too many of those. Don't become one of those. Go the route first of what moves you, of what you like, and mine that route. And as to essay collections, there are a bunch that are really good. One name that I will mention is Philip Lopate, who 30 years ago did a big book. You may have seen it at your used bookstore, The Art of the Personal Essay. It is a great essay collection, just a great anthology. And just recently, just in the last few years, he did a trilogy of essays, of American essays. The Very Beginnings was the first volume. The Flourishing, when we weren't in a post-literate age, was the second volume. And then experimental stuff, things that aren't essays, things that are identity politics and whatnot, but occasional gleanings of really good stuff, was the third volume. That trilogy is incredible. Just incredible. And so is The Art of the Personal Essay. So I'm not saying he's the be-all and end-all of essay collections, but you could do much worse than to look at his anthologies. They are really, really good. Michael Lombardo says, Steve, when you finally venture back to the cinema, I don't imagine that happening. I don't. I mean, at first I didn't imagine it happening because I couldn't imagine anyone caring about the cinema so much that they would risk getting and transmitting a deadly virus. But now the more I think about it, the more I think it's a mostly negative experience. Last time I was in the cinema, someone took a cell phone call to talk. They took the call in order to have the conversation. They didn't take the call in order to say, I'm going to hang up on you, I'm in the movie theater. And they didn't turn their phone off so they didn't get the call in the first place. Instead, they took the call and started talking. The whole audience had to turn on them, yelling to get them to stop. And they, of course, were not embarrassed. Instead, they yelled back. And the floors are sticky, and the people are jerks, and the guy in the booth is always high, so the projection is actually wrong. It's just such a horrible experience. Just in the aggregate, it's such a horrible experience, and I'd be leaving Frida to do it when there's literally nothing that I can't watch here. Nothing. So I don't picture myself ever going back. But what's your question? What is your usual favorite snack, bar, drink, and munchies for the film watching experience? Sneaking a roll of Oreos in your pants is not an option. uh, for me, when I did it, it was the biggest tub of popcorn. Just, you know, the biggest size that you have. Where the person would, they would scoop out the popcorn and then they would put on the butter, and I would tell them, put on more butter, please. Put on more butter. I'm paying a huge amount of money to watch this film. Please don't dibble. Soak the popcorn in butter. But I can't imagine going back. What would be the appeal? The crowd reactions? I can watch those on YouTube. I can't imagine doing it. But it was popcorn. The thing that should not be says, hello, Steve. I've been watching your comic book related videos. Well, I'm glad somebody has. Michael and I always joke that no one watches our comic book videos except the two of us. It has prompted me to go back and read the original Superman strips. He is my favorite superhero, but I have never actually read the original comics. My question is related to comics and Superman, and it is really a two-part question. What do you think about how Superman is treated in today's comics, and what do you think about Superman Red and Blue story in which it's heavily implied that he gets sexually assaulted? I know that story. Mark Richardson and his wife were very kind enough to get me Superman Red and Blue #1. Before I knew what it was, I thought it was just a collection of Superman and short stories, but it's actually Twitter leftist blue checkmark progressive hatred of Superman in stories. There's a story where he rescues a little boy. The little boy yells at him the whole time, do this, do that, why weren't you here faster, all that sort of thing, and he just meekly takes it. There's the now infamous story. That particular story is a year old, but it's the neckbeard quasi-fascist YouTube commentary I'd only just learned about it because they don't read the comics, because they're grifters. They don't care about what they yell about every day. They don't care about it. They're only hooking on to outrage. That's all. They are, as the phrase goes, rage farming. They don't care about it, and the reason you know they don't care about it is because they didn't know it was happening when it happened. It happened a long time ago. And I had many, many problems with that story. Apart from that single ambiguous panel, I had many problems with that story. That a 2-bit dictatorship can knock Superman out of the sky and keep him captive from the rest of the world for half a year. And it's just that he would not bring the bad guy to justice at the end. Superman brings the bad guy to justice. He doesn't say, oh, well, what are you going to do? I guess we should march on Portland. I had a lot of problems with that story, not just that panel. And also, because I can't resist, who is your favorite Superman villain? I don't really have a favorite Superman villain. When they're done well, which nowadays is never, but once upon a time, it very much was, when they're done well, I'm always happy to see them come forward in the rotation. Always. The silly ones or the really good ones. It doesn't matter to me. I was always interested to see what gimmick was coming up. One of the most interesting Superman villains for me a long, long time ago, this was before most of you were born, was something called the Galactic Golem? Something like that? I'm blanking on the character's specific name. It was Kurt Swan artwork. That's what I'm remembering. And the radical idea about this being was that he was stronger than Superman, which was unheard of. That just absolutely did not happen. That absolutely did not happen. And where an actual physical confrontation where no clever thinking is involved, no kryptonite, no red sun radiation, no nothing like that, Superman might lose. The Galactic Golem, I think, was the name of the character. That was a radical thing to think about. That has been, of course, that attitude has been explored a lot since then, mainly in the character of Mongol. In his earliest appearances, you actually do wonder, is this an alien being who is stronger than Superman? But at the time, the Galactic Golem, I think, was the name of it. The thing appeared in a couple of issues. But I was just as happy for the Parasite or Terra Man or a Brainiac or whatever. I was just as happy for any of them because it was always something new and clever. Now it's the end of the world. Now a Superman villain shows up. Not only will it be out of character, but it will be the end of the world. I am the supervillain of the month, and I am canceling out not only reality, but all realities that have ever been ever. Yeah, okay. All right. You could also rob a bank. But anyway. Andrew, all right, we'll do one more. We'll do Andrew Russell. Soon to be 20K. No. This is never going to be a 20K channel. Don't be ridiculous. Number one, what is your least disliked Cormac McCarthy novel? Nice try, Bob. nice try. There aren't any good ones. He's a waste of time as an author. Number two, what do you think of secondary reading for fiction works? For example, a lot of reviewers suggest that the likes of Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow offers a lot more if you obtain guidance from online or published studies of the novel. I understand that, and I've seen that, and I've also recommended some of those things. But I think, on one level, a novel in your own culture, in your own native language, that requires an outside source to make it more comprehensible has failed. It's not you who have failed, it's that novel that has failed. I don't believe that, for instance, I don't believe you need an outside guide to get the full emotional, dramatic impact of anything that Pynchon wrote. His novels don't fail. Some novels, I'm sure there are authors like these that are going to come up in these Q&As. Some of them you do. House of Grass, you need an outside source to understand what's going on in that book because the author intended it that way. That's a bad book, in my opinion. I guess if you're reading through something like, Gravity's Rainbow, and you feel like there are things in here that are going over my head, an outside source might help. I'm never against that. Not on principle at all. Anything that will help you to enjoy your reading more is fine by me. I worry sometimes that a lot of the readers of some of these kinds of books, these difficult books, are going to those sources because on some level they think they have failed as a reader, and I hate that. Almost always the failing is on the part of the author, not your fault at all. But anyway, we're going to wrap this up, and we will come on to part two.